Greetings, outcasts, freethinkers, narrative questioners, dot connectors, and genuinely open-minded and outright curious inhabitants of whatever realm we exist in at the moment. You are about to embark on another free first-hour episode of
The Mounds.
If you find yourself wanting to dig deeper and have the desire to join the conversation during our monthly Melt meetups, you might want to consider becoming a monthly subscriber. For as little as 3 lousy Babylon hokey-pokey tokens per month, you can have access to full-length, early, and exclusive episodes. Just visit patreon.com/themeltpodcast or click the link in the episode notes to set the process in motion. It's simple, painless, and very well might make you feel tingly inside. So without further ado, please enjoy the show!
This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Before listening to this episode, I would suggest going back to episode 120 and listening to that first, as this is basically the continuation of that conversation. Greg Little is a documentary maker, author, and investigator of ceremonial mounds and cosmologies of different world cultures. Hunter starts off the conversation by asking Greg about a document that the government accidentally released about psychoelectric weapons.
Yeah, okay. If you go to, if you do a search on the internet and you search popular mechanics.
Yes, I have the document right here.
There you go. And you search Forbes magazine.
Yep.
And you look for U.S. Navy patents, U.S. Navy electromagnetic. They're not really, well, they are weapons, but weaponry. You'll find fairly recent articles where they discuss it all. The latest one was Forbes got the patent from the Navy with their, they are making 3-dimensional decoy objects in the sky. They're 3-dimensional. They are decoys because they're not physically real in the sense that we think of physically real. They are made out of plasma.
Mm-hmm.
They become a dusty plasma. They are picked up on radar. They can change the size, the shape. They can break them into multiple pieces. They look like they're flying because they look like objects, but they are basically weightless. And they can move around instantly any way, and they can change, they can make them flatten out and rotate. It's all done with lasers, and the lasers, and when people think of a laser, they always think of like a light coming out.
Right.
And it's an electromagnetic field that's coming out. It is but it's not light in the sense that it's visible light.
Mm-hmm.
So many lasers are using invisible frequencies on the electromagnetic spectrum. And so those, again, they focus them on a specific point in the sky and they can produce a plasma. So they have been doing that. I believe they started this research in the 70s. I've said that many times. I think a lot of it started with the research of a Canadian neuropsychologist named Michael Persinger. And I think also that all of the studies that the government has done, not just the US government, but the UK government, governments in other areas of the world, I think they all pretty much came up with the same conclusions. And that is what we are looking at in terms of what is a genuine UFO. They are plasma formations. And I know that they are aware that you can interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they took that, knowing that what we're seeing out here are plasma formations. And I think they began the research from that. And the research has just gotten deeper and deeper because you can artificially produce plasmas, and they can also be produced in nature. And the sun produces them, obviously. It produces plasma all the time. So, yeah, there's a lot written about it. I'm actually surprised that it saw the light of day. But what it really means is they have even far more sophisticated devices now than whatever's in the news. It's far more sophisticated than what's in the news. And if you actually read about all that, then you'll see they have devices. Did I mention this last time that they can put words in your head?
Yes.
Yes, and that's what my question is.
Yeah.
Do you believe, or what is your opinion about these psychoelectric weapons? Do you think that somehow they could be connected with the cell phone and 5G, and they could actually implant thoughts, emotions, actions like this? What this map, this is from 1974, the actual patent. What they're talking about here is being able to create physical actions where they could make you have an orgasm. They could make you, they could make you move in a certain way. So it'd almost be like a Manchurian Candidate type of a thing where they could make you do things. Do you think that somehow the cell phone is related, and that maybe perhaps they're using this technology with 5G and EMF frequencies and cell phone towers, for example?
All right. Well, let me answer two ways. Part two, I'll go first. Part one. They have the capability. The capability is there, but I don't think that the cell phone technology is being driven by the military. The cell phone technology is being driven by money. Big, enormous. When you have something that almost everybody in the world uses, and it costs money to use, it's money, and those companies are driving it. Secondly, they do have the capability of doing some of that. I don't think that modern cell phones have the capability of transmitting that. There is a device, in fact, where a trip that we're taking this week, we're going to a place where there's supposedly vortices, where window areas where UFOs and other things happen, and there's some electronic equipment going along. And the question always comes up about how it all operates and what it does. I don't think cell phones have the tuning and the ability to be that discreet in the tuning. Your phone is putting out a very, very specific frequency. That's why your phone rings when somebody calls you, and it doesn't ring every phone in the world. They're not all using the same frequency. So, I mean, it's very narrow steps in those frequencies. But no, I don't think they have the capability for that. You mentioned that's a 1970s patent. There is one that is in 2018 that has a U.S. Navy patent that has this decoy technology using lasers. That was in 2017. So that's relatively new. But again, I'm surprised that it saw the light of day. I'm really surprised by that. But what it tells me is that they have things far more sophisticated. And I've said many times, I've been saying it for months and months, that I believe that all these photos that we're seeing and film that we're seeing of the Navy pilots interacting with these
Tic Tacs.
UFOs. I think those are this technology, and I think it's being tested. And people ask all the time, well, the government wouldn't do that. Well, sure they would. We test things all the time militarily, and I don't think there's anything whatsoever unethical about the military testing it. If they did it on unwitting citizens that aren't in the military, that aren't flying a jet deliberately to test what the radar in that jet can do, if they're doing it on citizens, that's another question. Of course, they did do things with citizens in the past. And ethics in psychology and ethics in pharmacological research was very different then than it is now. My training was in the early 70s when I got into psychopharmacology. And our ethics then were very, very different. I feel bad about all the animal research that we did. That is something that I've thought about quite a bit. My major professor, before he died, I remember visiting him in a hospital room after a stroke, and he cried about the literal thousands of rats that we got addicted to morphine and the hundreds of rats and mice that we did brain research on them, inserting what's called a cannula, which is a very thin micro tube that you put in specific brain areas, and then you inject micro doses of different drugs to test the effects in these different brain areas. But he felt terrible about that. Basically, the ethics were different, and there was a lot of research going on. I remember my first year of graduate school, two major professors. This was Memphis State University. This made the news in Memphis, the front page, and I was there the last time they did this. These two professors were teaching Introduction to Psychology, and my wife, who was not at the time my wife, was in this class. Well, they got graduate students, male graduate students, to come down, and we blocked all the doors, and there were about 250 students in this giant auditorium that had seats at the top, and it went down to the front. And so they handed back tests, and this was all planned, and they literally did this. One of the students stood up and said he cursed, and he yelled at him and said he was sick of this. I'm tired of this. You people graded this thing wrong. I deserved a better grade. And they said, sorry, we'll talk to you after class. The guy pulled out a gun and shot them twice. There were blanks.
Wow.
And they both had blood packs ready.
Oh, my God.
And they hit the blood packs, and they fell down on the stage. Chaos in the room.
Wow.
The university had approved that. That had been approved. That was 1972.
What?
And that was the last time that they did this. They did it 3 or 4 years in a row. But that was the last time they did it. We were doing research on cats. We didn't do dog research, but that was being done in what was called the Brain Research Institute, which was a collaboration between Memphis State, now University of Memphis, and the University of Tennessee Medical School. And so there was a separate building where we all worked. We were doing brain transfer research, which is unbelievable stuff, classic stuff in textbooks. I think I told you about the flies. Did I mention the housefly research?
No,
I did not. Well, that's I'll tell you that because that's a really good story. It is bizarre, but I feel bad about it. We didn't have to get any approval at all. When I started in criminal justice, which was 1975, nobody had to approve our research. Nobody. There was no oversight whatsoever. I decided I was going to do all kinds of research on offenders in our drug program, our alcohol program, the mental health unit. I've published probably 100, 120 studies in that in peer-reviewed journals over the years. But today you can't do any of that. Now, we weren't doing any weird stuff with the offenders. We were giving them various tests, and then we followed them up. In one case, we followed up almost 2,000 convicted criminals that had been to prison and then released. We followed them for 25 years after they left. 25 years. It's the longest recidivism study, the longest term recidivism study ever done in criminal justice, because we wanted to know if our treatment had an effect, it should last, it should show for a relatively long time. Most people run 3 or 6 month types of studies, but we kept running them because the data kept looking good. And I know I'm going off in different ways here.
Go.
We did a study on houseflies. I got involved with it with my major professor. It is a classic study. My name is on it. It's Leeming and Little, 77. We did the study in 74, 75, 76. And if you looked at textbooks before then, it used to say that houseflies were the only organism that had no learning ability whatsoever. Musca domestica is the name of a housefly. Uh-huh. And so this wasn't me that came up with it. My major professor said, that's ridiculous. Every living thing has the ability to learn. At least that was his idea. But nobody could figure out, how do you let a housefly demonstrate that it can learn or that it has intelligence? Uh-huh. I mean, people don't know, but pigs are extremely intelligent animals.
Yeah. Indeed.
But they really can't show you that. They don't have a voice box to inflect. They don't have fingers to manipulate things. And they eat in certain ways that they're designed to eat, so they can't really show it. So how would a housefly? Well, my major professor designed an ingenious system. Back in the days when we didn't have computers, we didn't have easy electronic equipment, and he made a shuttle box. It was about 1 inch tall, and it was about 1 foot long, had 2 sides. It had a little guillotine. I'm calling it a guillotine, but it's a door that goes up and down in the center. And it had a light over each side, and then it had electro sensors, light sensors that would tell you when the fly went from one side to the other. Now, flies happen to like light, but flies dislike heat. So the way this worked is the light would come on where the fly is, and the fly would like it, and the door would come up, but it would get hotter and hotter and hotter on that side. So eventually the fly would move to the other side, and the gate would go down, and it would time. And then these trials went on for hours, and pretty soon the fly sat by the door. And when the light came on one side, it just walked to the other side, and the guillotine would come down. Then the light came on this side, it would walk to that. And then, okay, so it's learning, but does it remember?
Right.
This is how I met my wife. That's where I'm going. This is the story of meeting my wife. So does it remember? So what we did is we took each individual fly, put them in a little fly house, that same fly. Then the next day, we took them out, put them back in the device to see if they remembered. And lo and behold, they did.
Wow.
The flies remembered. So that is the very first study, classic article in psychology. It's talked about in emotion and learning textbooks, classic study. So my thesis, I was in the field of psychopharmacology at the time, and my thesis was on a very bizarre drug called cyclohexamide. I mentioned it in my first UFO book because if let's say we wanted to abduct one of you, all right, I want to abduct one, but I don't want you to remember any of it. All right, I want you to be awake during it. I want you to experience everything that goes on, but I don't want you to remember it. So if I inject you with cyclohexamide and get it into your brain, that's a key here. That's why cyclohexamide is not used. It won't get into the brain unless you directly inject it in the brain, because the brain has what's called the blood-brain barrier, which is almost like a sieve that is inside of all the capillaries and blood vessels, and it only allows molecules of a certain size to get through. And cyclohexamide molecules are too big to get through, so they don't get into the brain. But if they did, what would happen is you would be totally normal, but every 15 minutes or so, you couldn't remember what happened the last 15 minutes.
Wow.
And it would work that way for several hours. So you would simply have after the cyclohexamide left, you would have a blank spot for that time. It would just be a total blank spot. That's why I mentioned it in my first book about UFOs called The Archetype Experience. So anyway, I got the idea, well, cyclohexamide, a fly doesn't have a blood-brain barrier. We already know that. That's in biology. So we had to decide how to. I wanted to see if I gave them cyclohexamide. Well, they could still learn for an hour or so, but they wouldn't remember anything. So that's what I did for my thesis, and it took about a year to run because you have to do so many flies. It takes a lot of time. You have to keep tons of data, and that's my wife was taking a learning class from my then major professor, who was the fly guy. Frank Leeming was his name. And she had to do something for as a kind of a little internship. And so it was either a mental health center where she wanted to go, but that was in downtown Memphis and she didn't have a car. So she decided that she was going to work with flies. She didn't want to work with rats. She had another choice to work with rats. And that's how I met her.
Wow.
Although I had met her before in an elevator and kind of freaked her out because here I was, this big hippie graduate student, and she was just an undergraduate. And she knew I was a graduate student. I just fooled around a little and told her she couldn't get off at a certain floor because it was restricted. And she said she felt so stupid. And then she saw me and she was going to turn around. Anyway, that's how we met. But okay, how do you get a drug into a fly's brain?
Yeah.
Well, I started out by injecting them with amphetamine, pure methamphetamine. And it's kind of hard to inject a fly. I had a micro syringe, which is a micro syringe puts enormously small amounts of drug. I mean, it's microliters. So in order to get the fly to hold still to inject it, you got to do it in the biggest muscle. It's under its wings. It has big muscles. So I had to inject it there. And we were trying to figure out dosages of all this. So what I did, you take the fly in this little house and you put it in the freezer for 5 minutes. And it comes out, it's frozen. It's frozen solid. It doesn't kill a fly. You put a fly in the freezer for an hour and get it out. It'll wake up. So that's how I started. And I had to use this giant magnifying glass looking down. And that micro syringe, it's about as thin as a hair at the end, it looked like a telephone pole would go into your side. That's what it looked like on that fly. It's like and the first times I did it, even using the smallest dose possible, the flies just went round and round, 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 round. So we finally decided that we would give it to them orally, we would basically starve them of water for a while. And then we mixed cyclohexamide in with sugar water. And then put the sugar water in a sponge under their cage, which had a screen on the bottom, and they drank it. They drank the drug, and since they don't have a blood-brain barrier, it gets straight through. But you can't, even with flies, you couldn't do that anymore. You couldn't do that kind of research unless somebody approved it. So that's just kind of my background in this. We did... if you look up scotophobin is what, and I'm so fortunate to have been involved in these things. There are books about scotophobin. It is considered one of the most bizarre, it's not a hoax, but miscalculations in psychology of all time. So I hated psychology. I hated school as an undergraduate. But I was still going. I don't even know why, because I was working full time at the newspaper in Memphis. Loved my job, but I took this course on learning, and I had to do an experiment. And in our textbook, then this was like 1970. In the textbooks, then, if you get those textbooks, they talk about memory transfer.
Mm-hmm.
And memory transfer at the time was, they said they were using worms, and they would teach worms certain tasks. Then they'd grind up the worms and they'd feed the protein to other worms. And the worms that ate it knew the task. And the idea was it must be proteins that form in the brain, because we know proteins form in the brain, and memory is encoded there. And textbooks in 1970 and 71 said that was the case. And so this guy at the University of Houston named Georges Ungar came up with this thing called scotophobin, which means fear of the dark. It's a drug. It is available, but it's fear of the dark. And so what he did was he took rats. Rats are nocturnal creatures. Mm-hmm. They love dark. Mm-hmm. So what he did was create a large shuttle for rats. On one side was dark, the other was light. So, and in the dark one, he had sounds, the strange, dangerous sounds that went off when they were in the dark, and then the rats would move to the other side. And it was safe there. Then the light would go off on that side, and it would be dark. Then the sounds would come in again, and the rats would go to the other side. And you do this enough, and then they'd put the rats in the box and not even have the sound days later, and the rats would go from the dark side to the light side immediately, which means they've learned to get out of the dark because something bad might happen.
Yeah.
So then he extracted their brains from the rats. I've done that many times. That's one of the things I regret. I probably, it was probably less than 500, but somewhere from 300 to 500 brain extractions. And you have to remove from the time the rat is sacrificed, and you use a guillotine for that, from the time it's sacrificed till the time you have to get that brain into, we used dry ice initially, but it wasn't fast enough. So we use liquid nitrogen. You have to drop it into liquid nitrogen to preserve the proteins in it. So what Ungar did then was take that and inject it into mice brains through a cannula, and then test them. And lo and behold, the mice had a fear of the dark.
Wow.
And he believed that it was a memory encoded. Well, other people started replicating the research. George Ungar came to Memphis. He became a professor at the University of Tennessee. And in collaboration, my major professor and Ungar came up with and the pharmacology department at the University of Tennessee Medical School came up with this thing where we did a lot of research. And I was one of the primary research assistants, but my name is on all the studies that came out on it. But it's not really a memory. And now they know that all that stuff about memory, it was nonsense, absolute nonsense. Memories are not encoded in protein, but if you read textbooks from the 70s, it tells you memories appear to be encoded in protein, and it's the hippocampus that does it and all that. So things are not quite, it's science. This is one of the things that I've learned being in scientific fields for so long, that things do change, and there is a heck of a lot going on in the background that nobody knows about. It never sees the light of day. I don't know where a lot of our research money came from. I do know initially that the U.S. Navy Office of Research paid for a 2-year study that the guy, his name was John Fletcher, he's deceased now, but he was a colonel in the Army, ran the Fort Knox Research Center, came to the University of Memphis. Again, that was Memphis, I'm going to call it Memphis State. As a full professor with this grant. He brought this grant along. I wound up on the grant. We went to naval air stations and tested around 3,000 Navy pilots with several devices. We tested their hearing, and we had a high frequency special device that we never opened, that we just plugged it in and used it in these Faraday cages. And it was a cone. If you actually watch the movie Communion with Whitley Strieber, you'll see a scene where the aliens have this long, it looks like almost like an icicle, and they put it on his head, and his head moves around and he has thoughts coming into his head. Well, this was a cone about that long. And when I say a cone, it was a little bigger than an icicle, and it came to a rounded point. It was made out of plastic of some kind, and it was put up to the side of their head. And so we did that in the 70s. I know that what the ostensible part of the research was for, it was to determine the hearing loss that jet pilots got and helicopter pilots got and prop pilots got. And they had an interest in ultra high frequency sound and electromagnetic waves. That's what that cone was for. And I don't really know the total outcome. I do know that the prop pilots were the worst. Helicopter pilots were always deaf in one ear, and jet pilots were the best because their hearing was always protected. But anyway, that's all I really know about it. And I got on loads of Navy bases. We were treated like officers. We stayed in the officers' quarters. Amazing, but that's just part of it. I do believe that everything that went on in Gulf Breeze with Bubba, the red light that was seen for over a year. I'm not talking about the Ed Walters thing where he photographed what looks like a UFO, but I'm talking about what happened after that, and hundreds of people were involved with that episode. I talked about that in the book Origins of the Gods with Andrew Collins. I'm certain that was a U.S. Navy experiment. When I say certain, I wouldn't stake anybody's life on it, but I'm 90-some% sure that's what it was, because it was right over the air station where the ONR office was. So that's just bits. I've gone all over the place here. Sorry.
No,
it's okay.
You may
Not at
never
all.
get to where you want to go in this. You let me go.
Do you think that the Phoenix lights were a naval experiment?
I don't know. I have seen all the film. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think it's aliens. I'll put it that way. I don't think that's alien. I don't think Roswell's alien. I've said that, and that's one. Andrew and I have talked about this a lot. I rewrote sections of my first 3 UFO books and reissued them this year. And in one of them, because I really trash Roswell in it, I said, the kiss of death to a UFO book. If you want to write a UFO book and have it sell almost nothing, trash Roswell in it.
Yeah, of course.
Now, when I wrote the first book in 1984, Roswell was nothing. It was nothing. And it's because it had been thoroughly debunked by a whole bunch of people. I have the original books. There was a Frank Scully and several others were involved in some of the early stuff with it. I know that lots of people just love Roswell and think that it is proof that something alien crashed there. I don't know if you've ever seen the Roswell report, the actual report, written report. Well, I'm going to step away for about 2 seconds here.
Sure.
Because I want your listeners, your listeners won't see it, but your viewers will. So, 1 second.
Okay.
You got to see my white pants there. I don't wear them. I have everything else packed away. White jogging pants.
I love it.
This is the Roswell report.
Oh, wow.
This is the U.S. government report on it.
It's huge.
It doesn't have page numbers in it. It's probably 2,000 pages.
Wow.
It has everything that was ever written by witnesses, people that were there. And I know why the skeptics dislike it. I know the thing about the Project Mogul balloon, if you actually dig into that with an open mind, the government was trying to hide something we were doing illegally, and it was the Project Mogul balloon. And several others had crashed in that area. And people say, well, what about the bodies? Well, this has pictures of the bodies in it. There, I'll show you. That's it. The Roswell, U.S. government printing office. Um, there are pictures in here of them with the Project Mogul balloon. If you read the original, I'm looking for the bodies.
Yes, you should. Aren't we all?
If you read the original newspaper reports, those don't match all the reports that were done in Roswell.
Mm-hmm.
They do not match what is in all the books and what you hear people saying all the time.
Right.
They don't match. The details are changed a little bit. I know this from memory research. People's memories are very, very bad, and we switch things around and dates. The older you get, the worse it gets, because there is something in psychology called confabulation.
Mm-hmm.
And confabulation is a normal process. Well, I can't find them now. There's too many pages for me to
Yeah,
find.
no shit.
Confabulation is a normal process. It is not lying. It is not making things up. It is making things up, but not consciously. It is, it's kind of like connecting dots. I know where I was and I know what happened. So we fill in, well, here's what happened to get me there, from here to there. And that's what happens. There were people in Roswell who saw small bodies, and they saw the military pick them up. And that happened in some cases weeks after Roswell. In some cases, it was a year. Those bodies were taken to the base. They were examined. They weren't human bodies, though. They were crash dummies that were made to look human, and it was for high altitude testing. And they dumped them from planes, and I believe all that. I don't believe that Roswell is what we're being told. And again, that's the kiss of death. And lots of people in the field, that's one of the reasons why you probably never heard a great deal about me, even though my books in UFO field sold really well. They got a lot of interest. There's a lot of people that cite them.
Mm-hmm.
But because I'm not a believer in the ET hypothesis, except I do believe we have been visited and we may still be visited, but it's not what people think. There are not necessarily beings in those craft coming here from elsewhere. I stick with Carl Sagan on this, and that is, chances are, if Earth is being visited, it is in some sort of, best thing to call them now is a drone. It's drone technology. It doesn't have beings within it, although that may occur, but there's not hundreds of them around Earth or thousands of them around Earth, and they're not abducting thousands of people all the time. There is something else going on. And to me, the other thing that's going on is far more interesting than aliens. And if the extraterrestrial hypothesis turns out to be true, there will be a lot. I'll be kind of disappointed, because I think it is much more interesting what is really going on than aliens. There are too many craft, too many descriptions of them, too many sizes, too many bizarre experiences, and we all know that it has changed culturally. The craft being seen in the 40s and 50s are not what's being seen today.
Yeah.
Right.
And the stuff seen in the 40s and 50s is not what was being seen in the few reports from the 1800s,
Right.
or those that go back, like in Germany in the 1500s.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back earlier to biblical times,
Mm-hmm.
and even earlier than that, into India and Sumeria, the physical descriptions are different. Whatever it is, it adjusts to our expectations. And of course, that was the gist of what we've written. And everything that I've written in that book is simply a continuation of what I've said and published since 1984.
What do you think? What do you think happened with Whitley?
Well, I talked to Whitley a couple of weeks ago, and I think Whitley interacted with a plasma-based life form. He on his cabin in New York State, there were Indian mounds. One of the first times that I talked to Whitley told me he thought we had done that. I had been on his show a few times, and then he looked it up and said, "Oh my God!" He said, "This goes back to 1999, and I had been on it like 8 times." And I can't remember when we started talking about it. It might have been the second show I did it was an hour and a half that we do them. And he talked about the Indian mounds on there. And he asked me, do you think that the Indian mounds might have something to do with it? Because he had people tell them that they were haunted, that people had seen forms and so on around the mounds. Mm-hmm. Of course, I think it may have something to do with it because I'm into the Native American stuff. And I know that they built mounds in places that are kind of portal and window areas. Mm. So I think Whitley interacted with a plasma form. I have said if you watch the movie, which I actually watched a couple times recently, because Whitley kept talking about the little blue people. Mm-hmm. I don't know if did we talk about that last time? About the experience that the guy had. And I had this weird device called a Gram potentializer, and the shaman that came to stay with us.
Oh, yes, you did. You did.
I thought I did. Okay. Yes. Well, Whitley asked me about that, and he said the little blue people. He said, remember that I saw little blue people. My son was talking about the little blue doctors and so on.
Right.
So I decided I'd forgotten about that and decided to rewatch the movie after we talked. Mm-hmm. And in the movie, if you remember, they had a mask.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he kept saying, that's not it. He'd see the ugly face under it. Well, that's not it. That's not it. And this is what I've said repeatedly. They don't have, the reason that they wear a mask is because they have no true shape. Their shape adjusts to what their purpose might be in appearing. It adjusts to the percipient, to the individual having the experience. And it might be to scare the person. Remember, last time I said that our initial interactions with these things, it's almost always scary at first because when they first appear, they're almost always in the form of a trickster. Yep. In some way or another, they take the form of a trickster. And if you can get by the trickster, you get to a much deeper understanding of them. And that's what Whitley did over the course of his many years of experiences with them. So, yeah, that's what I think happened to Whitley. They're not aliens, and Whitley won't say they're aliens anymore. He says it's alien to what most of us experience.
Right.
But they're not necessarily extraterrestrials coming from another planet coming here.
So what do you said you think it's something much more interesting. Are you talking about the plasma phenomenon? Or are you talking about...
it is this, when I say plasmas, I mean there is an energy that has an intelligence. That's why I use the Native American stuff about the singularity of energy, mm-hmm. the singularity of spirit, it's spiritual energy that created everything. So everything's a part of this. And I think everything physical is imbued with this energy. And from the Native American perspective, there's these two forces in this energy. Remember, one is creation and harmony, and the other one is entropy and disharmony. And those two forces are imbued with this generalized energy form that exists and is imbued into everything. And I think it's imbued into the earth. We interact with it a lot more than we think we do. I think a lot of intuition that we have is interacting with this energy. Some people are more in tune with it than others. And I have to go to brain chemistry and that. I've said since 1994 that I believe the mineral magnetite, which is found in the human brain, it was first discovered in 92 in the human brain, in the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory consolidation. It's found there. And it's in pigeon brains. That's where it was studied the most. And homing pigeons.
Wow.
Homing pigeons use magnetite in the brain. It is a type of iron. and it aligns to the magnetic fields of the earth. That's how homing pigeons find their way home.
Makes sense.
They use the magnetic lines in the earth, and it's their brain telling them to do it. We have it in our brain too, and I think that's how we interact with it. I don't have all the specifics down. Part of this trip that we're taking next week has to do with how these things might interact with us and the specific frequencies that are necessary. The people that I'm working with in this believe the same thing I do, that the Schumann resonance in human beings, that when we get to that cusp of it between beta and theta waves, that is when we're most susceptible to this. My best intuitions never came to me while I was running, playing sports, exercising. My best intuitions never came to me while I was taking a test. Anything like with full awakening consciousness, the best intuitions that I've had is when I'm laying down and can't get to sleep, trying to calm myself down and sleep. When I'm driving in the car, kind of in a long trip, but it's not dangerous. I don't have to pay attention very much. People often have their best intuitions when they've taken a mild dose of some drugs. They have their intuitions, and I think that's taken them right to that cusp. I don't know if I answered the question or not, but I think that it's an energy that is pretty much everywhere. And the reason all the cell phones and all that is relevant to this and all the other electromagnetic fields around us now is I think it impedes our ability to get to that cusp of at the Schumann resonance. I think it impedes our ability to do that. I think I believe that it has something to do with, I can't prove this, it's only speculation, but I believe the proliferation of cell phones, cell phone towers, all the towers, Wi-Fi everywhere, the powerful microwaves that transmit the cell phone energy, and we are being constantly bombarded from space by electromagnetic fields. I mean, if you're using satellite TV, how do you think satellite TV comes to you? The whole area is being bombarded by those waves. You have to have a specific sort of antenna tuned to certain frequencies to pick it up. But as I've said before, I think I told you this before, we are biological antenna.
Yeah. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And we respond to this. Luckily for us, we don't really sense it very much, but there are people who are electromagnetically sensitive. And there is a diagnosable disorder of electromagnetic sensitivity. It is a bit controversial. But there are people who can sense electromagnetic fields, and it disturbs them.
What do you think things like CERN and HARP and like particle colliders, how do you think that affects the Schumann resonance?
I don't know about CERN. Uh-huh. I don't know about the particle colliders. That's Andrew probably have an answer to that. Mm-hmm. HARP, there's a reason why HARP was built in Alaska. Right. That's where it was, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Am I right there? It's been a while since I've talked about it.
Yes.
Well, there's a reason why it was built there. It's literally in the middle of nowhere, and it's beaming into the sky. Chances are that some of that is being reflected and bouncing down in certain places. What its effect is, I don't know. I haven't read any research on it. I have read people speculating about it, but I don't really know. I don't know. It's like with even the cell phones. I've read a lot of research, but I don't know. I know that bacteria. I've found one virus study. It can mutate viruses. Definitely mutates bacteria. All the EM frequencies. What does that mean? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I don't think anybody will care until something happens and it all becomes obvious to us. And then I'm not sure what we'll do anyway. I can't imagine us saying, okay, 6 billion people need to give back your cell phones.
Right, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
and the cell phone industries have to go out of business. I don't think it's going to happen. Sorry.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Have you looked into any of Rupert Sheldrake's research?
I did years ago, and honestly, no. I did. I don't remember it. I don't remember much about it. If you said a couple words, I know it would pop back into my head, but I never really looked into it that much. No.
He talks about, one of the things is the sense of being stared at, and picking up on that energy. And he's done research with animals, how like a dog will know that its owner is coming home. And so when you were talking about the homing pigeon, I was just wondering if there was maybe some type of a connection there, that dog is tapping into the frequency of the owner and they're having some kind of communication that's happening.
Well, okay. I didn't know that Sheldrake did that. I have read a lot of research in that field, quite a lot. And but I don't remember Sheldrake in it. Why, I don't know. But I do believe that, yes, animals have that sense. I believe the pineal gland probably at one time was able to do that. And here's why. I think that the pineal gland, of course, is really in the middle back here. It's a couple inches in the middle of the forehead. It's often called the third eye. They know that it once had a much more powerful function than it does today. Today, they tell you that it makes melatonin. That's its basic function. It produces melatonin and helps you sleep. But there are many, many researchers who have speculated that it was actually a way that we could sense the presence of danger. Mm-hmm. For example, 50,000 years ago, humans were living with gigantic, very dangerous creatures. Wouldn't it be useful if you knew a saber-toothed tiger was on its way into the cave that you and your family were occupying, and know it in a way where you could sense its presence? So I have believed, and I know many others do, I can't remember their names now, but it's in various speculative literature, that the pineal gland probably sensed the presence of the electromagnetic fields from these very large animals. That is what I believe. And it was literally a self-preservation sense that we had, literally a sixth sense. I still think we probably have remnants left of it today, that we still sense certain things. I've had so many experiences similar to that where it turned out that what I was sensing was correct. And I can't tell you I've ever had the overwhelming sense of that when something wasn't present. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to other people that have too. So yes, I do believe that that's probably the case. Is it proven? No, not proven. And because of the ethics that have developed, it's getting harder and harder to prove any of this, because you can't, you had to do real cause-effect research. You have to be able to manipulate something and study the effects. So in order to do this, they'd have to somehow manipulate the brain and then study the effects of it. And we can't really do that internally, ethically. Not anymore. They did it with prisoners a long time ago. Mm-hmm. Michael Persinger's research in the 70s, I'm not even sure that you can do that anymore. It would have to go through a research approval team for a university, or there are lots of paid groups that will approve research. But all Persinger did was put literally a helmet over people's head, and it had solenoids within it that generated rotating magnetic fields that could be focused within the brain. And these students would be sitting in these rooms, these Faraday cages, and then having different experiences with it. And that's not intrusive, but I mean, you are putting a electromagnetic field in the brain and focusing it on specific brain areas. So I know that it would take a lot of approval. And frankly, I doubt very many people would approve that kind of research anymore.
Back to the plasma beings,
yes.
And how that seems to be a collaboration of the person who's perceiving it and the entity itself.
Right.
I have questions about the subjectivity part of that. In regards to groups of people who have seen these things and they all appear the same to them, and also people who throughout time have seen similar types of entities yet didn't have any contact with one another. So there must be something objective about it.
Yeah, it is objective.
Okay.
It's not, they're not hallucinating.
Okay.
Now, I don't know of cases of abductees where there were a bunch of abductees and all saw and reported the same thing. I know of cases with maybe 2 or 3 people. I think three. I know of one in England that had 3 people, father and his wife and a daughter that were riding. Andrew Collins did the first investigation of that. I don't know of others. I do know of groups of people that saw the same object at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
When I say at a distance, it could have been only a few hundred yards. And that, maybe 300 feet, which is 100 yards. But I don't know of any of groups of abductees who all saw the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But people do. There's a cultural expectation in all 3 of our minds here, and every listener or person watching this, they have an expectation of what a UFO is, and they have an expectation of what an entity in a UFO might look like. All right. And if you go back to England, say in the 1800s, 1600s, 1500s, they had an expectation of what fairies and goblins might look like.
Right.
If you go to Native American lore, they had an expectation of what the little people look like.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't look like the same. They didn't look exactly the same to all the tribes. There were some tribes that described the little people. This is in North America. They described the little people exactly like people in England would describe a fairy, even to having a hat. A cone-shaped hat that might have been bent over a little at the top, dressed in multicolored clothing.
Wow.
There are Native American tribes that said that. They all didn't say that they were like little blue people, that they were all, they all said they were small. That's why they called them the little people. So it would be the expectation within a specific tribe. And the tribes tell their stories. They have the commonplace myths about the little people. The little people come. They abduct people at night. That is in their lore. The little people abduct people at night. That's in their lore. So there's a cultural expectation that we have. And I've called this like an interaction bubble. When this thing forms, it has a large, powerful electromagnetic bubble around it. It's literally a bubble. It's the same thing your cell phone is putting out. Your cell phone isn't putting a line, a beam somewhere. It's putting out a bubble, giant circular bubble. When it hits a cell tower, that's the one it's using. That's why when you're driving, when it goes to the next cell tower, the bubble hits it. And then it switches to another cell tower for your phone call. But these things put this bubble out. You are in this bubble, and it interacts with what's happening with you. And I believe it reads our electromagnetic field. There is a device that actually reads human electromagnetic fields. It's called an electroencephalograph. We put out it's not, they say, oh, it's weak. It's not powerful at all. It is. It's just we don't have the ability to measure it at distance. We don't have equipment good enough that can measure it. But an electroencephalograph goes on. You put your head in the device, and it can read your thoughts. It can read what you're seeing, and it sees the electromagnetic fields that you're producing. So I believe that you called it an entity. I don't mind that word. It is a ball of ions, negatively charged ions and positively charged protons, and it is physical. It is a type of matter, and it forms into different shapes. And I believe in this interaction, it conforms to your unconscious expectations. And if you're filled with fear, it's going to be a trickster. It's going to be somewhat fearful. If you're a person who prays all the time. I mean, go to Ezekiel. You pray all the time. You sit by the river. You think about the end times. You think about how horrible that your people are being oppressed. You know, Ezekiel by the river Chebar, and he had the wheel within wheels come down, and God was there. It was a giant light that came down, and he saw the four creatures in it with different faces. They took on different faces. If you have that kind of mentality that he had and that expectation, then you see something that's angelic. Something that's angelic. Betty Andreasen Luca. Are you familiar with her story?
No.
Betty Andreasen is one of the most famous abductees, multiple abduction case. She's the most famous of them. And it was little 3.5 foot tall people, blue people. She saw outside through a window. She felt their presence. They came through the walls and windows to her, just like that experience I told you about that Lou White Eagle had, the Cheyenne medicine man, in that device, electromagnetic device that we had. And she was terrified. And she started seeing them more and more. There's 2 very famous books written about her by big-time authors, Betty Andreasen Luca, very, very famous. But over time, like Whitley, Betty started seeing their form change. And she became very, very spiritual about her experience. In fact, something that I want to mention, I actually have notes about this because if I ever talk about this, I want to make sure that I get it exactly correct. There's an organization called FREE, F-R-E-E.
Yeah.
I don't think it, yeah. Okay. Did I mention this last time?
No. I'm just familiar with them. Ray Hernandez.
Okay. Well, it's the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences. Back in 2013, they collected psychological data on 3,256 people who had contact experiences or abductions. Psychological evaluations on 3,256 people. That is an enormous number of people to do a study on.
For sure.
Almost everybody's experience started out with brilliant lights. They saw brilliant lights in the sky that came to them. They saw orbs that became larger and larger. They saw translucent beings in them. They felt that the beings were communicating with them through telepathy. Almost all of them, it's like 2/3 of them said, I wasn't really abducted. I was contacted. They spoke to me. But what they found was that they were remarkably devoid of mental health problems. However, almost all of them reported becoming very spiritual after their experience. That's what happened to Betty Andreasen. That's what happened to Whitley Strieber. The exact same thing. Both of them became very, very spiritual. And they believe in the spiritual world. They believe in spiritual entities. They believe that there's some bigger part of us. And that's what happens to almost all contactees and real abductees. They become very, very spiritual. And I think that a lot of them, they get beyond the trickster aspect of it.
Well.
Another madcap romp with Dr. Little.
It's hard to keep up with that guy. I have always said, I still feel like 80% of the list of questions that we didn't get around to last time, we didn't get around to them this time either.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
I love when people have so much to say and they just run with it and take us to places we didn't even think of going.
For sure. Yeah. I call it back roads. Like takes you off the map and into territory that there's no way that you could plan for. Yeah, I totally dig that. And Greg is very good for that.
And we went to freaky places throughout the whole journey. I love talking about psychoelectric weapons and, naval operations and, hitting, excuse me. God, I hope you didn't hear that. I just burped.
Loud and freaking clear.
But I love talking about, psychological experiments and Oh my God! Lord help me! Please edit that out.
It's working the gas out of you. Oh boy, are you turning into something?
Because I was holding that back the whole time. I kept this is why I never drink a fizzy drink when we have interviews, because it makes me have stuff happen.
Have bursts of energy.
It's like I have something in me that wants to come out.
And every time Atlantis comes up in the last 10 minutes. So next time we have to start with Atlantis. I would like to get that Edgar Cayce on Atlantis book that he put out and maybe touch on that too. Because I'm interested in Edgar Cayce too.
My mom was really interested in Edgar Cayce.
Mine too.
And she was also a Baptist. And I know David Avocado Wolf has talked about Edgar Cayce before, and who he has been reincarnated, who he was in a former incarnation.
Edgar Cayce?
Yeah.
He was David Wilcock.
No, he wasn't. No.
Oh, that's this incarnation, according to David.
David.
Humbly, according to David.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. God, it's been so long since I've listened to him. But yes, that is right. Maybe that's where I heard all that stuff.
Perhaps.
But yes, I am utterly fascinated by Edgar Cayce, and I've kind of dipped my toe into his realm
This one?
a little bit. Yeah, my feet are cold. But I would love to ask him a question I'm sure many, many, many people have asked him, which is how he got into Edgar Cayce, and we didn't get to go there. But I did feel very honored that this was the last podcast he's going to do for a while. So that was cool.
Well, and he's obviously very into Edgar Cayce because him and his wife are a part of the organization. And
yeah, but he didn't tell us how he got into it, how he got into him, what that journey entailed.
Yes. Next time, Edgar Cayce and Atlantis.
Yeah, the Atlantis stuff is cool. That was a cool way to kind of wrap that up, and also the stuff that's going on in Missouri. I'm glad that I snuck that one in.
That was absolutely fascinating, and the fact that he got to see and touch those things firsthand. But I'm also interested in the history and the bits and pieces of Atlantis that are found in the lore of different civilizations around the world. That is fascinating, but I know so little about it.
Yeah.
Right?
You do. You do, or you do not, or you do not. You do not know, or you do. I don't know which one it should be. I did like also talking about the psychological research that he's done and recidivism, and I wrote down those studies that he cited because I am studying to be a clinical psychologist, and so that really sparked my interest to kind of dive into his research and that level of his story. I find it utterly fascinating.
For sure.
Yeah. And I love the near-death experience stuff. Like we covered so much far and wide terrain of things that I'm utterly and completely into. So,
and probably the record amount of times that alcohol was mentioned in any given Melt episode. It just kept coming up, at least during the last hour. You're drawing a blank. Have I hallucinated people?
No. I'm thinking about that, and I think it's interesting because, again, he kept bringing things up that have either come up today in conversation with you or just in general have come up kind of in my realm, in my day realm. So it's interesting that he went to those places. It's like we're all connected.
And I wanted to bring up something that it might have been a key word for him to connect to Rupert Sheldrake is the morphogenetic fields, right? Is that
morphogenic?
It's not morphogenic.
It's not genetic. No, baby. It's morphogenic. Close. You were close.
Subtly condescending tone in your voice.
No. Walla bala mama. Not at all.
Morphogenic.
Morphogenic
yes.
field.
Which would have to do with fields of stuff that connect people and guide them and make them.
Pass the doochie upon the left hand side.
Passed one of those.
I
in
know,
a couple
but
of
that
years.
sounds like something you would say if you were smoking a blunt.
Or I'm being very hungry and needing to relieve
Oh,
pressure in my
don't
life.
go there. Don't go there. We don't need to talk about your nether regions.
Well, you just took it there while asking me not to take it there.
Well,
Any
I
old way.
burped too, which is so
Several times.
uncharacteristic of me.
Thank you all so very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. And hopefully you got something that you of value out of this experience.
I was just thinking that there's a reason we call this After Babble.
Yeah.
Because really we are babbling at
Of
this
course,
stage.
Yeah, it's informal. It's like you're in the room with us in our own little personal speakeasy.
And you can hear me burping.
Yes, like I do every hour of my life.
How dare you?
It's not true. Not true at all. It's
Schumann
like,
resonance.
It's like angelic language to me. Schumann resonance.
Exactly. That's my Schumann resonance.
Okay.
Hey.
What were we going to say?
Nothing. I just said, hey.
Thank you for listening. You're greatly appreciated. We love you. If you have things to say, guests to recommend, please get a hold of one or another of us. You can either do that through the Melt podcast at protonmail.com or
hunter-muse at protonmail.com. And fun fact, Mercury is in retrograde right now, and Chris and I are both by standard astrological calculations, we are both Virgos, and Mercury is in retrograde in Virgo. So we have had some issues with our website.
yeah, hopefully not hopefully, our website will definitely be up by the time you hear this. But
exactly.
there was a week where it's kind of been off the radar. It's been in the Bermuda Triangle of websites.
Yes, and very, very hilarious. I listened to Athen Clemente today talking about Mercury and about new moon in Virgo, and all of this stuff is leading to the same place, which is you have to be flexible right now. So the website being down is actually a good thing because we are revamping it in a sense where it's the phoenix that is rising from the ashes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
We're revamping it?
Well, yeah, because we have a new... We all have the same domain name, but it's starting with a new energy.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
I didn't say it. Athen did. Talk to him.
What was I going to say? Oh, and simultaneously, our YouTube channel was out of commission because of some stupid fucking... Well, it's not a stupid fucking episode, but the fact that has been out for like a year and a half. A Rosemary Fry episode. They just randomly decided to pluck that out and give us a strike. So we couldn't even post the new episode or episodes at this point onto there.
Yeah.
But the Patreon people, not trying to nudge anybody in a particular direction, but the Patreon people not only still continued to get the episodes, but they got the full fucking deal there.
The whole enchilada.
But
I did go to YouTube, and we are still up.
Yeah,
and
we
running.
just can't post anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why the last episode isn't on there. Last two episodes maybe aren't on there. Yeah.
Tony's
Okay.
up there, but
From Tony on.
yeah, but Kathy's not up there.
Kathy's not up there.
And Kathy is amazing. The Kathy O'Brien episode was a great episode.
But by the time this comes out, they all will have heard that.
And
maybe 2 or 3 times.
And they'll all be up and running because it's a new iteration. It's a new day, new energy, new moon.
New moon. Okay. Enough
Right.
babble.
That's babble.
Thank you, people. Thank you very much. We love you. And until next time.
Meow.
To hear the full-length version of this episode, get access to exclusive and early episodes, and participate in our monthly Zoom meetups for as little as $3 per month, just click the Patreon link in the episode notes or visit patreon.com/themeltpodcast. Contributing financially will help to make this podcast my full-time gig that I can devote more time to and allow me to create more content. Other ways of contributing would be giving us a favorable review or rating wherever you get your podcasts, subscribing to us on YouTube, spreading the word wherever you and your tribe congregate, or just by sending us your positive thoughts and intentions. In a quantumly intertwined and holographic multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.